Thank you everyone for kind of coming to join us tonight. We kind of have a variety of different more advanced or like we put it as expert topics for this. So there is going to be some kind of prerequisite of Excel knowledge that we're going to expect everyone to kind of have, but we're happy to answer questions and work through the different items. Some of the different items that, as Sarah had mentioned, we're going to go into kind of some pivot tables, index match, VLOOKUP, as well as some better ways to kind of make an interactive dashboard, and then get into a little bit about recording macros and using macros. So with all of that said, like I said, please chime in with any questions in the Q&A feed tool as we go through, but I'll go ahead and get started. Feel free to follow along on your own or just watch for now and let me know if you have any questions. So kind of the first thing we want to talk about is kind of the difference between the items of a table kind of versus of a filter button. So kind of on this auto inventory sheet, we have an range of data, right? It's set up in the typical rows and columns format of Excel. But right now there's no kind of filter buttons or table items. So if I wanted to real quickly actually make something into a table, format it, make it easier to read for my end user, I could just simply press Control T. Excel will automatically know what items would be included in the table, and my table has headers. You can see kind of the different type of data that's stored in the first row, and it will automatically go all the way to the right to where it finds the first empty cell, and all the way down to where it finds the first empty row. Go ahead and click OK, and you'll see that this kind of did a few different things for my table, and a lot of this is based on kind of your initial table features or kind of preset preferences. One thing you'll notice is that it put the banded rows in place, and that's what we call when we have kind of a different shade color every other row going down. And then when you're selecting in a table, you'll see this is under the Table Design tab. There's a section called Table Style Options, and you can see banded rows is selected, and that's why it went ahead and put that there. And then up at the top, you'll notice the header row, and then you'll notice the filter button. And this is kind of one of the first things I was mentioning, where there's the difference between kind of having a table and then just having kind of filtered data. The table interacts in this kind of a named range now, and it has a few different properties that does change how Excel interacts with it. Kind of most notably, when you want to expand a table, you can kind of go into properties to resize it. But then you get this filter button, and this filter button I keep kind of referencing because it's not only unique to a table. We can actually have that turned on just any set of data if we wanted. And if you wanted to actually go and look at how you would either turn off the filter button on the table, again, like I said, there's the checkbox, just like the checkbox with banded rows. You can kind of change the style of this, as well as kind of the color in the table styles. As with most Microsoft products, there's kind of a preset style selection that you'll have. But if we wanted to change this back to not be a table anymore, and like I said, you'll run into various things where tables do cause a little bit of issues or could be the non-ideal way, you would actually simply click up here in Tools under Table Design to convert to range. What this is going to do is just convert it back to plain text. It actually left all of our banded coloring in place, and it even leaves the header row in place. But now this is not a table anymore. So when I click in it, it's kind of not behaving as a table. It doesn't identify as a table with the Table Design tab. And then furthermore, like as I was mentioning, we lost our filter button, but we can very easily get that back. If we actually come up to data, then just click the filter. Excel will put in the filter button, and you can filter it just as you could if it was in a table. So I can just kind of unselect car and so on. And then if we go back to our kind of table option, I'll show you kind of one more unique item for, again, or a benefit of having a table in is you can look at doing a form. So if you have data entry, this is a feature in Excel where, this is obviously an inventory of cars. if someone had to come in here and just enter new cars in over and over again, they can actually you can actually set it up to have a form, and a form's just auto created from Excel based on the different columns within a table. And to add your form button into Excel, if you kind of go to File, Options, and then you'll go to Customize Ribbon, and then look on, so I believe I will have it automatically. Let me go ahead and take it out. Or go to All Commands. You can kind of scroll down and you'll see there's tons of different commands that you can actually customize into your Excel just to kind of put it into what you would want it to be. But it will select Form, and I'm just going to put it actually in the Home section. So if I click Form, then click, oh, let's make one custom group. So we'll add a new group on Home, click Form, click Add, and now Form will be in our New Group Custom tab, or grouping on the Home tab. And if I click OK, go to my Home tab, you'll see over here, New Group and Form. And then this is all you have to do. So then once you're into any table, you can very easily click Form up here on the top right. If I need to add a new car, just click New, and then simply you can just fill it out. Toyota 2018 car model, and very simply just kind of go right through that, and then you'll click New, or just hit Enter, and it'll add another row. Some other unique pieces of when you're dealing with a table that is a tad bit different from kind of other options, I guess, within Excel, is what we call the slicer. And slicers are very useful when you're trying to make a user-friendly intro to Excel, or I guess intro to a table or set of data. Under the Data or the Insert tab and the Filters group, if you actually just click Slicer, I can just go ahead and click Brand, and now I have this kind of visual button. And it's all it is simply just the filter button. But now I have this. And you can see that this could get very creative as far as if you're making a different table. This can actually be used to filter out Excel charts or tables. And it's just a more visually appealing, user easy way of filtering data. Just click that to delete it out. And then the one last thing, you can always add a total row on the bottom of your table. And you'll see that it kind of comes down here. It takes a guess. Right now it's just doing sum of mileage. You can do average mileage, and they will have drop downs on all of them. So I can actually go in here and very quickly throw an average price in, average year. That's not very helpful. And then you can count. So a few different things you can very quickly do without having to type any formulas. I'll click point and click. And like I said, so if you want to actually resize a table or include more data, you kind of come down here to drag it. Oh, it is filtered. So again, this is where some of that usability of a table gets a little awkward, but if I just kind of unfilter it, I can grab the resize, include more data, and so on. So kind of the next thing, again, with the table, we cover this in a different, or we cover an intro into this for around doing sorts in the first, or I believe the second Excel class. So kind of, if we go in here and do a custom sort, I believe we've, in one of the first Excel classes, we talked about just doing a very basic sort. You know, if I wanted to just sort on brand, so all the Toyota cars are at the top. But if we want to do something like brand, then model, and then year, these are all kind of different options actually available to us with the sort or custom sort feature. And the trick to doing this custom sort and understanding what you're looking at is to just kind of very simply read through it. So we're going to sort by the column of brand, sorting on the cell values from A to Z. And if I want to sort by brand and model, you very simply just add a level. So we're going to sort by brand, then by model. Let's do largest to smallest. And then it kind of just very simply goes down, right? So we'll sort by brand, then by model, then by year. Then just go ahead and click OK. And then now our table is sorted. And to kind of go into a different sort option, so we just did kind of a more advanced custom sort with that and kind of showed those options. I think the next thing to think about is if you want to sort or kind of provide a little bit of analysis within your sort. So say if someone came into you and said, what's the 10 most expensive cars on the lot? You could kind of sort by highest to lowest, count the top 10, copy that out as kind of one option. Or all you have to do actually is just go to sort, number filters, top 10. And there's your top 10 most expensive cars on the lot. And again, there's a few different options in this sort number filters options. I usually, top 10, above average, below average, are all kind of very useful things. There's even custom filters you can kind of go in. But I find it very useful to know some of these very quick tricks because this is something that you might get asked if you're reporting on data or your day-to-day work is including this data and a external stakeholder has an immediate question for you. The next thing we're going to do is a review from the last Excel class, but I do think it's important to kind of touch in on it again as we're going to look to kind of go into a more advanced version of it. And what I mean by that is the VLOOKUP. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and reset my thing, remove the turtle row just to kind of clean back up our data. We can see that we have this model number over here on the left. The model number, again, corresponds to our model key. So I come over here and we see our model key. So if each one of these is a model key, we could actually go in here and figure out that this first one is 16, that's Taurus, and I could actually go back in here and maybe retype in Taurus here, but we're actually going to make a model name column. And I could type in Taurus there for 16, but this would take a while, and that's where, as we mentioned in the previous Excel class, this is where something like VLOOKUP comes in. There's a piece of data in another table that has a I guess a reference or ID number that we could kind of look off of. So for this one, it's kind of that model number. We know the model number on this table is the same as the model number in our other table, and we just need to pull in a different value based on that model number. This is kind of a good way we could look up doing VLOOKUP. Again, VLOOKUP is vertical lookup, contrary to popular misconception where it's value lookup. It's actually doing vertical. And what the vertical means is the reference to how the table is set up in your lookup table. So as you can see, this is in a vertical fashion where the far left column is indeed the lookup value. And that's, again, one of the important prerequisites of VLOOKUP, and I'll talk to that more as we kind of put in this formula. So if I click into this cell, we type in equals, and we're going to go ahead and do our VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP. And again, Excel auto hints will try to help you out, right? We need a lookup value. We're going to look for this value, which is 16, our model number. And we're going to look for it in what table? So for this one, we're going to be looking in this table. And the requisite here and why it's kind of VLOOKUP and why there's more advanced options is the lookup value has to be to the left of the value you're returning. So if my table was flipped and my names of my cars were in the A column and my numbers were in the B column, VLOOKUP wouldn't work unless you did some pretty fancy workarounds. And that, might not be a big problem for certain items, as you could just very simply, obviously just change that table layout. But in certain situations, that's not going to be an option for you. And that's how we're going to go into our next item after this. But so from that lookup table, what column of data do we want to return? So we don't want the data in the first column. We want the data in the second column. So we're going to go ahead and put 2. This next thing is typical for, there are certain situations where you're just trying to find more of a close to an approximation. And in those situations, you actually have to have there's another kind of prerequisite to that table in order to use approximate match, where the data has to be in ascending order. For what we're going to do today, just kind of worry that we want to go with the exact match. So we'll just do false. We'll close the parenthesis, hit enter, and then we're going to go into our we'll see that something goes off with our table. And what happened here, and just to kind of provide us that review, I wanted to go ahead and highlight that we did not use our absolute references. As a reminder, if you're referencing an exact area, that's always not going to change when you kind of do autofill or a range going down. You want to make sure you do the absolute references. And the easy kind of shortcut is if you go ahead and click in the middle of your cell reference, just press F4. It'll go ahead and put that $ sign in front of your row and column and make it an absolute reference. Hit enter. Autofill's great, works on the table, and knows that you're going to be dragging it down on the table. Went ahead and autofilled that all in. And if you're using this sheet at home, we do have the option. I'll go ahead and do our color lookup, and this is again just a simple VLOOKUP. So we'll just do color name VLOOKUP. We're going to look up our color number. We're going to find it in our lookup table. We're going to make sure our table is an absolute reference because we do plan on autofilling this, and this is not a relative reference. Comma, and then we want this to be an exact, second column is the data we're returning, so that's where the color name is. Then we'll go ahead and put this to exact match. Close parentheses, hit enter, boom. And so this next thing we're going to look at, and as I was mentioning, is what happens when our table is a little bit, our VLOOKUP, or the value we're looking for, happens to be to the left of the data that we're trying to pull. Or what happens when the value we're looking for is to the left of the unique identifier or lookup value we're going off of. So for that, we're going to, or it should be, we'll go ahead and hit insert. So if we come over to the salespeople, so it should be not mechanic, but we'll do sales POC. So if we look at our sales POC numbers and we go to our salespeople item, we'll see that their ID number, is actually in column D. Again, in this scenario, you could just go ahead and move those values over to the left, but more different and more scenarios, or with more dynamic column number references, this index match that we're going to be going to is your best case. So what I meant by the dynamic column reference, when we were doing our VLOOKUPs, we were putting in a hard number for 2. Excel does not actually like it when you go to a relative reference for this 2. So if I replace 2 with A1, because A1 included the number 2, it would not work. So this is where kind of index match comes from, and this is kind of the big brother to VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, or horizontal lookup. So index match is actually 2 functions. So the index function is going to get a value at a known position. Basically, you tell index what coordinates you want to pull a value from, and it pulls that value. So if I did kind of index right here, and we're only going to index from this array, right? So it's just kind of a 3 by 5 array. And I just want the, I want to basically pull back 2013. I would just do 2, comma 2. And all that's doing is giving the coordinates in that array to pull the value from. Thanks, Excel. It's a nice audio flow. It's not going to be helpful. So it did go and it pulled 2013 because that's in that array, that is the second row, second column, 2013 value. So we're going to combine that with the match function. So the match function finds a position in a list. It's designed for kind of this one purpose, right? Find the numeric position of an item in a list. So in order to do that, we'll go ahead. So in order to combine it, so we're going to have our index function, and then we know our lookup table. So kind of what array do we want to pull index from? We want an array to pull the index from this array. Right, so that's kind of our lookup value. And furthermore, to make it a little bit more interesting on this, our first names happen to be in a different cell from our last names. There are other options, but we're going to kind of use this as a reason to practice this twice. So we're going to want to pull our first name, space, and last name. So it's going to be a very complex formula that will be able to return, based on our ID, the first name, space, last name of each salesperson. So we have our array that we're looking in, and then we're going to go to comma, and we're going to do a match. And the match function, right? So we need to go, we want to pull the value, the sales POC number, and it's saying, all right, well then what array? So again, this is going to find that number 4 in an array. And the array is just going to be this set of values. So it's going to look for a number 4 in this set of values. And then we have a match type. We're going to do exact match on this. Close parentheses. And then the row number for this will be a 1. Get that out. Again, we need to make sure we have our absolute references. So go ahead and make this absolute, make this absolute, enter. So now number 4 should be Leah. So number 4 is Leah, correct. And we're going to want to set this up again because we want to, just to show that we know how to do a more advanced formula, we're going to go ahead and do this a second time in the same items that we pull their first name and last name. So I'll copy this. We're going to add a space, so do the ampersand, quotation mark, space, quotation mark, and that will insert a space in our formula, ampersand. I went ahead and just cheated and copied and pasted it. So in the second one, what we're going to do is we're going to find that name, and instead of pulling the first column, we're going to pull the second column where the last names are stored, press enter, and then now you have your first name and last name. And again, bright side of a lot of this is we can now, a lot of these different features in here can all be kind of relative references, and so there's absolute references. So if you come across an item where your column number needs to change based on another cell, you can actually just very simply replace the 1 here with a cell reference, and then now you kind of have a dynamic index match to go find the value based on another value as it changes, which could be useful in a few different situations. Kind of going back out of the more complex formula land, we're going to go back into doing something that provides a little bit of visualization or an ability for us to make our data easier to read or aid in a reader with the intent to aid a reader in determining trends of a situation. So right now we kind of have this salespeople report. You see these quarter-over-quarter sales targets. You can kind of read through them. It's a little bit hard to say, like, at first glance, it's going to take me a little bit, right, to read through all of these and say, well, who really is ending 2019 strong and who didn't really end 2019 the strongest? And the easiest way to do this is actually a very simple thing where you can kind of make a sparkline or a trend. We'll call this trend, and we're going to use the trend section to do sparklines. And sparklines are one of those things that you might have seen around and wondered where it kind of came from. It is a very simple thing. I think it's one of the more simple, along with the slicers and some of these other items. It's just something that people don't typically know exists in Excel as a feature, but then find kind of odd and very useful uses of it once they do know. So if I click here in the trend, you just click up here under Sparklines, click line, click our data range. So we're going to compare it over these 4 quarters. The location range is going to be there. Click OK. And then now you see very simply, I think I can just do a drag down. And now you can see very quickly what our trend is over these 4 quarters amongst our salespeople. And you can kind of see that, Joan apparently, has been kind of slowly declining, whereas Trevor had like a low point coming up, and just provides a very quick, easy way to understand some of the data. The trend lines kind of have a few different options, high point. You can mark their high point. So now the dot on it just recognizes where the best point is. That's kind of useful because now I see that, Anna's the only one that had a 3rd quarter high. Everyone else kind of peaked from the beginning. You can mark their no points, and so on. There's a few different options in here you'll have as far as their bed, and you can change their axis so that you can adjust how compact or spread out it is. We go back over to our auto inventory. The next kind of thing we're going to look at is really the easiest or the best way to kind of organize that large chunks of data kind of without changing the original data, right? So if you just get a big table of data, you don't want to be like messing around on that one sheet, or you want to very quickly understand what it is and see different trends or different breakouts. This is kind of what pivot tables are meant for, and their usefulness in here. So if you just click into again, this is one of your perks of having a table. It's formatted as a table. You just click into it, go over to pivot table. With pivot table, it says, okay, what table do you want to use? We're just going to use table 2. Go to a new worksheet. Click OK, and then we kind of come up into our table, our pivot table. And again, so if we want to make our pivot table and have a report of kind of the breakdown of cars on the lot, maybe the number of cars on the lot by brand and type, very simply, you can kind of go over here. We'll just grab our brand. We'll say, we'll put brand as row, type as column. And if we just need a count, we know every car on the lot is going to have a year. So drag sum of year or year down to values. And then for values, we want to go ahead and change that into sum of year, kind of the other Excel we talked about. Click the drop down, you can change what the value field is being summarized by. So instead of sum, we're going to change it over to count. And then now I very simply can see the different breakout of my Ford cars, Ford SUVs, Ford trucks. But say if I wanted to go ahead and change that to be, maybe the dollar amount, right? Because 8 cars is probably not the same dollar amount as 6 SUVs. One actually might be more than the other, and in the end, sometimes the dollars are what really counts for this. So if we go ahead and remove count of year, I'll go up here and grab price, just drag that down here, and sum of price goes up in here and shows our sum of price. We can actually do see what I was mentioning in order earlier. The Ford SUVs are worth more than the Ford cars on the lot. However, this does not quite look like what we would expect the price to look like. So if we want to change that to actually show in dollars, we go over to value field settings, and then click number format. And go ahead and just change that to accounting. Click OK, and now it's kind of broken out more as to what we expect a dollar value of a car, in auto inventory lot would look like. And then kind of that was a very fast way that we were able to just show, brand by model or by type, right? So then we need to go with another step in, right? The boss is like, okay, that's good, but I actually need to see, the model of each of them. Let's break it out also by model. So if I go down here and just drag model down here, 200 brand, now we have it as kind of our brand by model by type. Kind of break it out. If I, this might not be the easiest way, you can just drag type, and now we have brand by type by model. And again, this is kind of a very fast breakout. Pivot table usually includes some of these, the format, I guess, would be to say, has these drop down options, right? So you can kind of expand and drop. So if I just kind of minimize it, now you kind of have like a little interactive ability to filter through these and see which item is which. If we want, however, to kind of look at see what else. Now, some of the things to note with this is, there are different options you have as far as kind of what your in-dollar pivot table looks like. You don't always have to have your pivot table coming out in this kind of very pivot table-like option. I do think kind of looking at the totals and subtotal options, if I click do not show subtotals, and usually, you can go and turn off, let's go to column, all for rows and columns. This kind of maybe cleans up a little bit of the options. Again, these are all different options you will have that I just kind of recommend you explore as far as what your Excel or what your, I guess, end report should be looking like. This is all just kind of stored up here in this layout function. It typically starts in this compact form layout. I went on for columns. And I think that is something to make sure you note as you kind of work through that. And as we were showing earlier, the kind of these pivot table functions option of it, how the pivot table is summarizing your data, it's kind of just all very easily changed here. So if you have sum of price right now, maybe you want another set of price. And for the second price, we actually just want to show the average price next to the sum of price. And then now you can kind of break that down. We can go ahead and change that over to accounting. And now our table has, right, the sum of price, the average price right next to it. And if we're starting to think about how this would look as far as, showing this to a end user or an end stakeholder, right now we kind of have a very manual set of data. It's just a table format. It might not be the easiest for a end user to kind of comprehend. We might want to look at, inserting our pivot charts. So kind of pivot tables, pivot charts, they kind of go together in a sense. Mm, we'll just, for the sake of it, I'll just throw a pie chart in for this. You can kind of put them together, and then once you have them together, everything's going to interact off of each other, in the sense that, as I minimize forward, you notice forward over here is now just blue, and then you can actually see, and this will break out. I actually do want to change it over to a different chart. Yeah, stacked color. It's a pretty cool option for it. All right, so as I minimize different things, you'll notice, and I don't want field list. We're going to go and just look at some price for this. Right, as I minimize different items, you notice it kind of goes away. And if I expand forward, now forward is a kind of a, forward has become kind of different categories, right? So now it broke forward out in that sense. And if I want that to be a different option, which I believe I do, I'm going to put the type in. Yeah. So as it breaks out, you can again break out Toyota, right? So now Toyota's breaking out, you kind of expand the car and so on. If you also have this, as we had discussed in the tables, you also have an option to kind of change the way that people interact with it by adding slicers. And the slicer, what it's going to do is we're going to have it, put it on sales POC. Oh, wrong one. I made a column with a name, so we should use that. So we can go ahead and do, I did not name it. So if I do this now, right, so now I can just very quickly click. I could see what Leah did or what Joan did. I can expand it, right? So I'm like, okay, they sold cars. They sold 18,000 in Ford Mustangs, and that, or you can kind of expand it back down, see that they did more Toyota. Then if you actually click here, you can kind of combine two different people to see what they sold. And the one other feature that we had not shown yet on the slicer is, while we have the slicer for kind of categories, then you can also kind of come in here and add a slicer for a timeline. So if you have a date column or a date value, you can change it to be a slicer based on a timeline. And come up here, we'll go ahead and all periods. Let's go to our pivot tables. So right now what I want to do is the timeline is broken out by all of the dates. So I want it to be based on just, forget, blanking on how to do this right now. But you can simply just select, so this is the dates received. So now I can go back and just very quickly select, maybe I only want to see the cars that came in, the first 5 months of 2017 that arrived on the lot. And Trevor sold, and now you're seeing that this is kind of all stacking on with each other, that we have kind of our pivot table moving as we adjust our values. And our salesperson slicer also impacting the pivot table and the chart. You can see where the dashboard is slowly would start to form, and it does take a little bit of kind of thinking through or brainstorming with your end user that would be using this to see what else you would want to add into it. But if we wanted to say add another pivot table onto this chart, so I just go ahead and add another pivot table down here. And maybe this next one is just going to be purely about the color of cars on the lot. So we'll just do a count of brand, and this is just a breakout of the color of the cars on the lot. Then we'll go ahead and add a pivot chart to go with it. We'll just do 100% stacked. Let's just do a pie chart. Now you have this, and what we can actually do is you can link your slicers to all so that they filter both charts. So now as I select these items, you can see, with one click, now we know Anna sold only red. Let's clear that filter. And now everything is adjusting based on our two slicers that will interact with both items. So you can kind of make it easy for them to see the breakout, visually, numerically, and interact with your data in kind of two easy to use functions. And say we wanted to add, if this is going to be an end user as a car salesman, car lot manager's dashboard, something else that might be useful for them is a understanding what the weather is this coming week. So in order to do that, we're going to actually make a weather chart for the person. We're going to have it actually update off of an external data source. This is kind of one of the useful things similar to kind of BI or Tableau. You can retrieve key values or information from an external website or data source. And for this one, we're actually going to go to weather or a weather.com. So if I go over to insert, data, go over to our data tab and click from web. Give it a second to load. We'll go to apologize. So we need to, I skipped a step. So we're going to actually pull up weather.com. Go find our weather first, and then we'll put that link in to actually pull it back. 3. Let's go get Arlington's weather. We'll get the 10-day. Copy our URL. And we'll click from web. Go to advanced, or we'll just click OK. It's going to go and find our web view. Let's see. Oh, it's not liking it today for us. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it work today. That's exciting. Apologize for that, but I'll have to double check that another time. But essentially, these kind of different options, typically it's a little bit easier. I think weather.com might have changed since last time I tried to interact with it, but it just goes and it'll scan and find an HTML table that you can kind of connect your data to and very simply put in a connected data source that when you refresh the data, it will actually pull in and useful information for that could kind of, pull in the price of corn or pull in the next 5 days weather forecast. The last thing I was going to walk through today is kind of a brief introduction to macros. So if you want to kind of use to think about what a macro is, essentially it's just going to automate repetitive tasks you do in Excel. The big worry with the macros, though, is you never want to run a macro that you did not write or you do not understand or you weren't the original author of. It'd be very dangerous to your computer. You can kind of do just about anything with a macro to a computer. So I'd be very cautious in running anything that you receive that you did not write yourself. So in order to kind of get into macros, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you have the developer tab. So if you go back to File, Options, Customize, I believe it's under, it's Customize Ribbon. Customize Ribbon, and then you're over on the right, your developer tab would probably not be selected like mine is. Once you click OK, you'll notice now you have a developer tab up here. There's various different useful options. Today we're just going to kind of briefly walk through recording a macro. So if I needed a macro that, let's see, maybe just typed the alphabet or the first, we're only going to do like the first 5 letters of the alphabet. I kind of click record. And the big thing when you record a macro is it's going to do everything you do to your screen. So if you manipulate or zoom in, scroll, select a different tab, just about anything the macro can record. And we'll try to replicate that when you go back to play it again. And I'm actually going to do Control-Shift-A for the shortcut key for this. And when I click OK, click A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Then click Stop Recording. Now, to simply play the macro back, you can kind of go into your macros, find the macro you just did, press Run. And you'll notice that it typed A, and then it went over here and did this. This is kind of again, where the relative versus absolute references come into play. When I recorded that macro, I actually had not selected the relative references option for the macro. So what it did was it used what I did for the first cell where I hadn't actually selected a cell and just typed A, and then it went to the cell that I had selected and retyped these. So if I actually delete all of these, delete that, and if my cursor is anywhere, and I do Control-Shift-A, I'll type A in the cell I'm in, and then do the B, C, D, E, F, G on the other cells. So if we wanted to fix that, you just select Use Relative References, and now when you record a macro, we'll just Control-Shift-B. It's going to use relative references. So wherever my cursor or cell starts at, it should do it. So if I do A, B, C, D, G, and to kind of show that it does a little bit more than that, I'll go ahead and highlight all of this. Fill it in yellow, go over to blue font, increase it, change it to some weird character, and center it. And then go back to developer, stop recording, and then now anywhere that I type select and go ahead and hit Control-Shift-B, it creates that for me. And this can kind of be done with various different items. Once you get more advanced into macros, there's kind of the ability to take input to do things based on other cell values. It has kind of those embedded logic functions. But the big thing is when we added our developer tab, now we can actually click macros, go in, and we can actually click edit. And we can look at the difference between those two macros. So when you click edit, it actually pops up, and now you're looking at the Visual Basic applications that types it, and you can kind of see how this is all active cell reference, and it's saying to put it in, and it's essentially just the different items. This is all the font formatting. And you can kind of learn a lot of different about this, but the big thing is to kind of do your kind of record a macro, see what it did, figure out how you would want to replicate it, and that's kind of your first steps towards writing them. That I did cover kind of a lot today. Let's see if we have any questions. Kind of a variety of topics. I hope you found some items useful for you.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. And please, any attendees, don't be shy. If you have any questions of anything that David went over or need him to review again, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A so we can get that answered for you.